Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host S.M. Hali, presenting another edition of Defense and Diplomacy. The elusive peace which has been evading Afghanistan and of course Pakistan is something to look forward to by the people of both the countries, and there are serious problems at the hands of terror attacks by the Taliban, by the Daesh, and also their mutual distrust between the two countries. We have to bridge these gaps and to talk about peace in Pakistan and Afghanistan, which are mutually inclusive. We are honored to have in the studio today two eminent panelists from Afghanistan. We have with us women's rights activist and civil rights activist, advocate Samira Hamidi. Welcome to the show. And we have with us Mr. Omar Sharifi, a media analyst of high repute. Welcome. So let's start the discussion with you, Samira. You've been part of this initiative which we call Beyond Borders, in which we are talking about peace and also bridging the gap. And we just had the quadrilateral conference in Islamabad, and of course it's time now to talk about bilateral. But please tell us more about, first of all, what are your aspirations from the quadrilateral process which is going on?
Thank you very much. It's great to be in this show with you. I think, first of all, about the quadrilateral meeting between the four countries. I, as civil society representative, and our delegate, we do welcome this initiative. We think we definitely need a lasting peace in Afghanistan. People are tired. We lose lives every day, civilians as well as those who try to defend the country. But at the same time, we do also have observations, and the observations are in terms of, like, in one hand, we are looking at the government's effort, our government particularly, and then those other countries who would like to support this process. There's a lot of effort, there is a lot of work beyond it, which we think it's necessary. It started in 2010 after a national peace consultative jirga, where 1,400 Afghans gathered, and they agreed that yes, we need to discuss peace and we need to go through a negotiation process, and we need to bring peace in Afghanistan. But on the other hand, we face violence every day in Afghanistan. There are suicide attacks. There is no change in the position of insurgents, particularly Taliban, in terms of attacking civilians, in terms of creating horror and creating more fear in the heart and in the mind of normal, ordinary people. So that is an observation that we have, that how can we go to a peace negotiation as a next step? This is what we are hearing now, that there will be, by end of February, there will be the first direct talk between Afghan government and the Taliban, and we.
If you hold that thought, I'll just come to you. Let me solicit the opinion of Omar. He's been very silent and patient so far. So, what is? She mentioned the first possible direct talks between the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan government. How do you see that as a not only a good omen, but what about a a positive stance coming from it?
Thank you. Obviously, it's a positive step, but that's not, I don't think it's the very first time we ever talked with the Taliban. What is kind of make this time rather different and, in a sense, more significant is, like, there is a hope that at last, after all these years of bloodshed and terrorism, which I think the whole region is suffering from, there is a possibility of a consensus among, in the region, and also major powers like the United States and the Chinese, about the nature of the problem, a recognition of the problem, and then dealing with the problem. So this whole quadrilateral talks that's happening between Afghanistan and Pakistan with the Chinese and the Americans, because of all these years of war and, like, this kind of hopes of peace and never comes up. Afghans are rather cautious, kind of cautiously optimistic about what's going to happen. But what is really, I think, in my opinion, is significant is like, we hope that at last, if nothing happens, that there will be an understanding between both nations, Afghanistan and Pakistan, about who these people are, what terrorists, and recognition about the nature of these terrorist groups, about the problem that kind of threatens both Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then hopefully finding a way to deal with it. For me, it's more of an understanding, regional understanding, rather than like me sitting with the Taliban and talking.
Obviously, and I fully agree with you. To be cautiously optimistic or optimistically cautious, I think it's the right step. So, pardon me, I had stopped you there, but please tell us more about what is your opinion of the possibility now, which seems to be a reality, of direct talks between the Afghan Taliban and the government.
First of all, I think it's very important to understand which Taliban we are going to negotiate with. Or because they have so many names and they come with so many different faces and even statements sometimes. So that is the first and foremost important step toward making this process successful. Secondly, how inclusive and transparent this negotiation is going to be, because at the end of the day, those who suffer are people. And people have grievances. People do have a lot of complaints of the situation. There's poverty more because insecurity affects directly the lives of people. If, at least I can speak for Afghan government that my expectation is how they're going to make it more inclusive. Then, as a women's rights activist, I think we are 50% of the population. One. Secondly, women in Afghanistan have come a long way. We are not the women of 2001. And let's not forget that it was Taliban who imprisoned women in their houses for years. So we do not really want men to, first of all, go and negotiate on behalf of us, because we have our own mouth. Secondly, we really want to see whether Taliban do have a change in their mindset and position toward women, or do they come with the same mentality, and do they come with same restrictions on women's rights? Our constitution is very important. It's very modern. It really supports equal participation of men and women in Afghanistan. And then the peace agreement is the most important part of this peace negotiation. And where I stopped earlier was the ceasefire. Everything starts with ceasefire, because you can't really kill people and you say, oh, I'm going for peace negotiation. So that has to really take place. And
no, indeed, Samira, you make a very important point. 2 points really. One, that the voice of the Afghan woman is very pertinent. The Afghan women are a very important stakeholder in this peace process, the peace talks. And second, of course, that you cannot have talks and warring together. So that brings me, Omar, to the perception that perhaps there is likelihood of the spring offensive. Normally, spring is the time when the warring groups, and especially the militants, they go on the offensive. So what do you think is going to happen now, especially when we are moving towards talks?
I personally don't expect the ceasefire to happen, and there is no indication to see that there won't be any spring offensive, Taliban spring offensive. Or more violence. And actually that's the message that the government keep giving us all the time, that do not expect much. We're going to have a hot year ahead of us. My fear itself is this, well, I personally agree that the peace process has to go on, and I know that we are in a very initial stages of the peace talks. But I know that for us, there is a limit about the patience of the sufferings. There's a limit about the sufferings. If there's a seriousness among the Taliban and their supporters, there should be some sign that shows that we are walking toward the right directions. Afghan government, and I think all the political parties that's kind of behind this process, are putting an enormous political and social capital on the table about taking this risk of, we're going to talk, yet at the same, and please be patient, telling us be patient, and let's us to go ahead with the process. And there is an understanding, and actually a consensus among almost all major parties and groups in Afghanistan that we need peace, and you have to be patient, we have to go, and we should not kind of completely become very emotional and sensationalist about what's happening. But at the same time, there is also an understanding that we have to be prepared. There will be more Taliban attacks, and now that we have splinter groups among the Taliban and who kind of trying to prove their legitimacy by emphasizing more on violence, it is very difficult to expect that there will be a ceasefire. But on the other hand, Afghanistan is a country of very sudden changes and some unexpected developments. That's why, I mean, given that the history we have, the emergence of the Taliban, their fall, of all the governments that comes after that, and this major developments that happened in Afghanistan, which was unbelievable a few years ago. So given all that, I think there is a hope that if this process results in bringing the opinion of the policymakers in both countries together, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and more importantly, we have an international guarantee, then there was a hope that will be followed by ceasefire. On the other hand, there also is a recognition that if the violence continues in Afghanistan, and if it's not unchecked, and this process will not end into something substantial and meaningful into the violence, then this violence will not be confined in Afghanistan. If the Taliban become stronger in Afghanistan, it means that they're going to stronger in the region. It means that nobody will be safe.
Point well made. But we'll talk about the bilateral issues. By bilateral, I mean between Pakistan and Afghanistan in a short while. Coming back to you, Samira. What do you think of the chances of the spring offensive? Because you see, the last time we brought the Afghan Taliban on the negotiating table, that was the 7th of July last year, again in the same place, Murray, where you had the 2 days conference of yours. It started on a very sanguine note, but when the next round was about to come, it was declared that Mullah Omar is dead, and he's been dead for probably more than 2 years, and the talks were called off. And then since then we have had a war of succession between the Taliban, and of course the Taliban have gone on the rampage. So what do you think are the chances of a spring offensive and the negotiations also taking place?
As my colleague rightly said, we are not really getting encouraging message, particularly from our government in terms of spring offense. There are lots of direct and indirect messages coming from the government, particularly from the Afghan National Security Forces, in terms of we might have a more difficult 2016 year, coming year for us, or our own year 1396. And that is the problem. Because in one hand, when you really want to bring these actors on the table, and you want to really sit down and analyze the problem and bring and talk about peace, talking about power sharing, maybe talking about some of the role in the government. We really don't know, but you can sense and you can understand. And then, as I said earlier also, the message that we get, you have to be ready, it has a very, very negative impact on people. You know, the level of immigration that has increased between Afghans. It has been reported by end of 2015, it was 200,000 Afghans who have left the country. And it's not easy for those who leave and go. Secondly, economically, we have issues where there's a lot of economic problem. Thirdly, with the end of 2014 withdrawal of international troops, we are more or less by our own. The government is trying its level best to contribute in different sectors, and the message we are getting is that there is a downsize in the economic support and the aid that comes to Afghanistan. So these are all the things that put a lot of pressure on normal, ordinary people who do just follow the news, who want to regularly continue their life, and who want to work. Also, in terms terms of our government, it unfortunately put the government in a very critical situation, because, you know, in one hand, they really try to tell the nation that we are working toward bringing peace, and then with the offense, with the violence that Afghans face every day, it really put them in a difficult position, and unfortunately trusting the government become a challenge, and it has somehow
True.
become a challenge.
But you see, I can understand, because this particular government happens to be a democratically elected government, and government in which the people of Afghanistan have reposed their confidence, albeit it's a unity government, but it has serious challenges. But I'll get back to you in a while. I wanted to ask you, Omar Sharifi, do you think the Afghan National Army is fully equipped to take on the threat of terror attacks after the departure of the foreign forces?
I don't think there is any army in the world that's fully equipped to take the challenge that, like, in a short while. But on the other hand,
especially because we saw that when the international forces were here, in Afghanistan in huge numbers.
Let's put it the other way. The Afghan army was born in...
Okay, I have to take a short break, where when I come back, I'll get back to you, and then we'll also be talking about the irritants between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Because we are discussing the Pakistan-Afghan peace process. We're taking a short break. When we come back, we will be picking up the thread from where we left it. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. We are discussing Pakistan-Afghanistan peace process. So before we went on the break, you were telling the viewers about the preparedness of the Afghan National Army in combating the terror threat.
The experience of the last year, in a way, when we look at the Afghan army as a new institution, it kind of emerged in the last 10 years, both going through a complete reformation and also complete restructuring the army. Right now, the Afghan army is, like everybody now in Afghanistan, they know that Afghan army is under huge pressure because of this vacuum that created after the withdrawal of the over 100,000 international forces. The Afghan army, this put the Afghan army in a very kind of a difficult position to defend a large territory, especially the borders with Pakistan that most of these terrorists are concentrated around. And right now, especially without the lack of the efficient air force, problems in terms of logistics and command and control and all these things, that I have to say that there is now an understanding that the Afghan army is under a very difficult situation. On the other hand, when we review all the developments of 2015, despite an enormous Taliban attacks, Al-Qaeda attacks, groups like Daesh and others, and all these and other smaller extremist groups who are affiliated with the Taliban, mostly South Asian, Central Asian groups, the Afghan army technically never lost a single major operation that they faced. They managed to successfully defend, though overstretched, obviously, defend major urban areas, and the only time the Taliban managed to take Kunduz, which is a city in northern Afghanistan, for a few days, but the Afghan army managed to take it back. But on the other hand, once you move into the a counterinsurgency operation, I think Afghan special forces are doing a great job so far in terms of but definitely they're having problems in terms of logistics, they're having problems in terms of air support, and more importantly, they have problems in terms of command and control. What is happening, on the other hand, is after the coming of the President Ghani and the National Unity Government, they are trying to restructure and reform the current Afghan ANSF, that Afghan National Forces, to be ready to take over a more conventional type of operation, because Taliban has changed their tactics from more hit and run attacks to more of a conventional attack. So the Afghan army is in the restructuring and reforming process, but on the other hand, it needs huge and long-term help from the Afghan allies, especially the United States, NATO and others, to be able to sustain that level of pressure.
In fact, it's an understatement, because the help you require is immense. But coming back to you, Samira, we would like to talk about relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it is essential that we have a good relationship. We had problems under the Karzai regime, but when Dr. Ashraf Ghani took over as the president, it was very promising that Pakistan was one of the first countries he visited, and he made a all-out I would say, a very open approach. He even was the first head of state to have visited the Chief of Army Staff of Pakistan in the general headquarters. But since then, we have seen a kind of a roller coaster. There have been ups and there have been downs. So what, in your opinion, are the major irritants between Pakistan and Afghanistan that we are having this kind of a trust deficit?
I think it's again very much related to the peace and security in Afghanistan. And as you rightly said, one of the countries President Ghani visited after inaugural of national unity government was Pakistan. But then the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan is one of the reasons that added a lot of tension and that actually damaged the relationship that President Ghani really wanted to start very strongly and positively with Pakistan. Secondly, especially it went really tense when after 7 July direct peace negotiations in Mari, we had a severe suicide attack in a very civilian living area, unacceptable, where 400 families suffered badly. They lost lives, they lost their houses, they were badly injured. It's also I think media also play a critical role from both sides, both from Afghan side as well as from Pakistan side, and the analysts that we have in both sides of the country of our countries. Though we are living so closely, it's like 45 minutes flight from Kabul to Islamabad. But I believe the tension is very serious, and the blame game is there. I think also it's the position of Pakistan in terms of the understanding that Afghans back in Afghanistan have is that there is Pakistan think there is good Taliban and bad Taliban. So they fight the bad Taliban who are in Pakistan, but they don't do anything in terms of good Taliban who are basically worse Taliban for Afghanistan. And these are all the perceptions initially that really damages the relationship.
I fully agree with you, because these are the perceptions, but our Prime Minister and our Chief of Army Staff have made it very clear that the war against the Taliban in Pakistan is across the board, and they're not trying to have any favorites. They don't want to differentiate and have good Taliban or bad Taliban. In fact, of course, General Petraeus, who was the commander of the ISAF in Afghanistan, he once said that there is no such thing as a good Taliban or a bad Taliban. The only good Taliban are the dead Taliban. But anyway, coming to you, Omar Sharifi, you see, it seems, I mean, I'm not a government spokesperson, an independent analyst. To me, it seems that yes, Pakistan has been making some mistakes at times. But on the other hand, from the Afghan side, it appears that the expectations are very high, especially in the mind of Dr. Ashraf Ghani, who expected that Pakistan will probably tie the hands of the Taliban behind their backs and place them on the negotiation table. But Pakistan lacks that capacity. Yes, Pakistan has influence over them. Pakistan has contacts with the Taliban, but it cannot force them. Second, a lot of problems in Afghanistan, which are probably due to your internal fissures or let's say mismanagement or whatever, I don't want to give it a bad name, but can be checked in from the Afghan side, but Pakistan continues to get the blame, and it is said that Pakistan is not delivering. Pakistan is the bad boy in this game. I want your candid opinion.
I mean, one thing is very, very obvious and clear in the minds of almost every Afghan, and that is the importance of Pakistan for security and stability in Afghanistan and actually in the whole South Central Asia region. And I think part of the expectations, that's high expectations that the Afghans have, especially, I mean, not only the Afghan government, honestly, because millions of us came here, lived here, and enjoyed immensely the hospitality of Pakistanis for years. So there is an understanding of Pakistan that probably that image that a lot of Afghans have is probably kind of triggers part of that expectations. So you should not blame us for having a lot of expectations, because we immensely...
I don't blame you, really. For the sake of discussion...
discussions,
yes.
like that...
Let us be realistic.
Very realistic. And on the other hand, what is probably also kind of, in a way, rather confusing for a lot of Afghans is the image that the Afghanistan get in the Pakistani media. And that, when we talk about like why we have these feelings about Pakistan, why this blame game happening, there is, I mean, I personally feel that there is a, though it's obviously improving, especially after the more kind of bilateral talks, not with kind of non-state actors, but mostly state by state, but civil society to civil society, media to media. Like, sometimes I have a feeling that Afghanistan image in Pakistan is an image of a frozen in time. Like nothing changes, nothing happens. But on the other hand, fortunately or unfortunately, we have experienced almost every change that's socially possible in the world in that particular region, from communism to Talibanism, from democracy to emirate. So all the things that happen, all these massive social transformations that are happening in Afghanistan, that is probably not very much reflected in Pakistan, and I think that also kind of makes some of the Pakistanis that kind of feel why the Afghans think like that. I think there is a gap of understanding in terms of how we see each other. And on the other hand, but on the other hand, when it comes specifically on the Taliban, and more specifically on peace and expectations from Pakistan and peace, about the peace and Taliban, there is an understanding, and I think it's kind of substantiated in a lot of these, that the majority of the Taliban leadership are based or scattered or hide in Pakistan. So that's an understanding in Afghanistan. Though
actually it works both ways, you see.
And
we feel that the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan
and now I came to
leadership is hiding in Afghanistan and actually, operating from there.
Absolutely, and I came to Pakistan and they say that this gentleman who's a criminal and responsible for a lot of horrible terror are actually hide in Afghanistan and stuff. So this is something that, I mean, now for me it personally means that, hey, we have a shared problem. That is a shared problem between both of us and we need to address it. So what I see today, and especially even, we before mentioned about there's a peace talks happening and the government keeps warning us about the bad year ahead of us. It's like actually that's an expectation management at the same time. We started to understand how much Pakistan can do and how much we can do. The point is, we always know that the Pakistani can do much better than us, because Pakistan is a much larger country, it has a stable economy, it has a stronger army, and it dealt with Afghans and Afghan refugees and Taliban since their inception in 1990s. So the whole understanding that the Pakistanis knows more and have more structural as well as economical capacity to deal with the things, that's probably some of the things that maybe the Afghans raise that expectation for Afghanistan. And we also have to understand that for a lot of Afghans, we are suffering horrendously because of these attacks on our schools, on our children, on hospitals, on shopkeepers and journalists and everything. And all these image of blood, death, destruction that we kind of see, and whom we have to reject. We have to kind of look at ourselves, how much we have, and we have to rely on God and ask our neighbors. So this is a situation that probably, I think, somehow...
I actually, I share your pain, because we in Pakistan have also suffered tremendously, maybe not as much as Afghanistan, but tremendously. Over 60,000 innocent lives have been lost. And recently, I mean, starting from 2014, 16th of December, when the the Pakistani Taliban, they attacked the army public school in Peshawar, and more than 142 innocent children died. Recently, they attacked the Bacha Khan University in Charsadda in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and now they have given a warning that they are going to target in future the schools and colleges and universities, which in fact means, and since you are a peace activist and so are you understand that our entire future is being put at jeopardy by a group of non-state actors, which we actually need to jointly combat and eliminate. So the question I would like to ask you, Samira, is what is the way forward? How do we bridge, first of all, the trust deficit between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and join forces to combat this common enemy which is harming, which is in fact devastating both these countries?
one of the reasons we are here, the Afghan delegate and the whole program of Beyond Boundaries, is this, how we can fight these blame games, how we can stop challenging each other and questioning each other, and what are the ways to actually find joint solutions. And this last meeting that we have had in the last 2 days was very efficient, because we did come with some of the recommendations in terms of one is the politics in the government, and they will have their political debates, they will have their discussions and their own work. And on the other side, we are the non-state state actors, the civil society, people representative. We, at the end of the day, come and bring a lot what people think and what people views are. So first of all, we really agreed on people-to-people dialogue, in terms of understanding, sharing our culture, sharing, bringing think tanks together, doing joint research in terms of what needs to be done in both countries to kind of fight this culture of hatred that has started between the local communities. As my colleague said rightly, back in Afghanistan, there are lots of understanding and different views about the role of Pakistan, and lots of questions why Pakistan is not supporting Afghan government, and why they are kind of not influencing the Taliban. And secondly, it's also in terms of the development, in terms of education, as again Dr. Sharifi said, we have a lot of expectations from Pakistan, education-wise, health-wise, in terms of how we can bring some of the models that are working very well here back in Afghanistan, quality-wise, so that quality-wise it helps people. It's also in terms of media. We did come to a joint consensus that yes, controlling media would be impossible, but at the end of the day, those of us who are engaged, those of us who are working toward peace and stability in our countries, we should more talk about the positive side of the results of the joint work that both the countries are doing and playing. And lastly, just not to forget the agreements that have been made between both the countries, the regional agreements, how to put them into implementation, so that because those are for the benefit of both countries in this region.
Exactly, and they should not remain just MOUs or memoranda of understanding. They should actually be executed into action. So, Omar, I'd like to ask you, our future, when I say our, I mean Afghan and Pakistan, is being held hostage to the terror situation which is prevailing in both the countries, and our development projects are absolutely on a hold. I mean, take the example of the TAPI, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline, the CASA 1000, and so many other aspects which will benefit the people of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the entire region. But we cannot, you see, execute them until we bring peace. So how do we go about doing that?
I think as a student of history, because I'm studying at the same time.
Anthropology, to be more precise.
What I've learned, and living in Afghanistan all my life, never being out and just experiencing almost everything from the president to Amir and then to another one and to king and caliph and everything, what I learned is it is impossible to rely on these non-state actors, which is actually mostly coming from violent extremist groups, more comprised of these violent extremist groups, in order to create dominance and use them as a tools of foreign policy for any country. If you look at, like, for instance, like Al-Qaeda, we know that they were supported by United States, by not directly, but these groups whom later became Al-Qaeda, and they attacked the United States in this horrible tragedy of the 9/11 happened. So using these groups as somehow and putting them on the table as a possibility, as an option, is just simply brings disaster in long term. So I think for Afghanistan and for Pakistan, if you want to go ahead, there is first a respect and appreciation of each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. That is, I think, very important. That nobody has to look at the other one as like, you're better, I'm bad, you're weak, I'm strong. I think that kind of that culture, because we all become part of a bigger community, which is, if you put a regional community, which is also a cultural, a religious community for both of us. Look at from Bukhara, Samarkand to Kabul, Ghazni, Lahore, Peshawar. Like, they are all part of the same thing. So I think in order for us to become together, we need to look more kind of bigger, in a bigger picture, and find ourselves who we are and put ourselves in a place, our cultural and historical place, and remove all these extremes of violence, which is kind of a little bit anomaly in our history. Our history was defined in the whole region by trade of knowledge, by trade of goods, by a shared faith, by shared culture, and by beautiful kind of cultural traditions and rituals we had, not by death, destruction, blowing up, and all this amazing thing that's kind of, when we look at the history of Islam in this region for 1,000 years, since the Mahmud of Ghazni, all the way to Iqbal, I can't see anything that somehow resembles this. And therefore I see why, if something doesn't exist like that before, and we thrived despite enormous problems, why we should have them right now? Because they are not the way for me. So what I've learned as an Afghan is that in order for us to remain together, trust each other, and create an environment of cooperation and prosperity in a way, these elements should be removed as a tools of foreign policy, as a tools of influencing each other. I think there are much, much better ways to be connected rather than these groups.
I'm certain. But Samira, earlier in your discourse, you mentioned the role of media, and it is extremely important. The very fact that the three of us are talking here on a Pakistani media, but we need to do much more. Both of you mentioned the wrong, or I would say tarnished, image of Afghanistan or Afghans being presented in the Pakistani media. And then the way we look at problems, even the most serious problem plaguing us, terrorism. So we need our media to be acting much more closely in coordination for the time being. I mean, it's shocking for me that no APP correspondent of Pakistan is present in Kabul, and vice versa. Your TV programs can be watched probably only in the border areas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and not here sitting in Islamabad. We need to have cultural exchange through the window of media. So how can we, trust or rather bridge this distrust through the help of media?
I think first and foremost, it is to expand the communication and coordination. As I said, exchange between think tanks and civil society groups, it's happening right now. We came here, colleagues from here were in Kabul a month back, and this exchange is happening, and it's working very well. So it has to start with media as well. I think if you don't talk to each other, then you can't understand. Of course, when you talk, you argue, you point out the issues, you do blame each other, but at the end of the day, we are humans. We share the same religion. We share some of the very valuable cultural issues in this region. And you come to a consensus and you come to an agreement, and that has not happened, and that's something that we have been also recommending. I think on the other hand, it's also important to understand that media want to sell their work in both countries, and as I said before also, controlling them, I will say, will be impossible. But for us to, I think it makes a difference when I'm coming and talking here, and I don't have any problem with Pakistan national TV channel.
No, you see, since you're mentioning the television, for example, let me give you an example. We are getting Turkish dramas from Turkey dubbed into Urdu, and people love it. And I'm sure your television must be producing outstanding dramas and entertainment programs in Afghan language or Pashto or Dari or whatever, which can be dubbed into Urdu or Punjabi and Sindhi, Balochi, and shown to our people so that we understand each other better. So we need greater media coordination.
Absolutely.
If you allow me, Omar, I mean, both of you mentioned the quadrilateral process, in which China is an important player. Of course, the US is too. But the advantage of China is, first of all, it's regional. Then it has a very, a positive approach towards its neighbors. It likes to reach out to its neighbors, even with the ones with which it had problems, and share the resources. For example, if in Afghanistan, if you have a certain commodity like a mineral or any other natural resource, and we have the capacity of exploiting it or turning it into something which will earn revenue, we can join forces, help you set up an industry and share the revenues, which will be a win-win situation. This is the principle which China has been following. So we need to emulate that example. What do you think?
You mean in terms of Afghan Chinese, or in terms of like Afghan Pakistan in general?
In all the neighbors, why not Iran, why not Central Asia,
Well, that's
even
actually
India?
happening. So it's actually happening. Actually, the Chinese have invested about $3 billion in a major copper mine. Though what that happened, that there happened to be a very major historical site, so that area is now under. They're trying to find another way for that. But there is a Chinese, and actually, a few days ago, we just signed another agreement for building up railroads with the Chinese. And there are also, I mean, Iranians, Indians, Indian companies that have invested in different kind of minerals in Afghanistan. So what is, I mean, these things happen in the last couple of years. But for now, I think the President Ghani also made it very, very clear when he came to Pakistan and gave like this speech to Chamber of Commerce, that he was in act asking like the Pakistanis, like, this is the opportunity if you can invest and stuff. So I think that if you look at Afghanistan, and I don't say that we don't have bureaucratic problems. There are definitely bureaucratic problems, and you know the bureaucracy, how that works. But in general, the understanding, at least that's official Afghan government policy, to encourage close bilateral, between AFPAC, bilateral trade agreements and investments. And they put a goal about to develop it from $2 billion to $5 billion a year. So we hope for that. There is absolutely, I don't see any problem in terms of like mentality, but how the bureaucracy might work, it might take some time, but...
Exactly. So viewers, with that we wind up this discussion. It has been very heartening, and an intense debate was carried out by both our Afghan friends, and they were candid in pointing out what are the areas which have been causing friction between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and of course the problems which Afghanistan is facing, and they are cognizant of the problems which Pakistan is facing. So once you have identified the problem, you have identified the route which you need to take to resolve those problems. I personally don't see what is the impediment. If there is any impediment, it is in the will. Where there is a will, there is a way. So let us build that will, that Afghanistan and Pakistan, whose futures are entwined, whom I have to borrow a phrase from the former President Karzai. He used to say Pakistan and Afghanistan are conjoined twins. We have to support each other because our futures, our goals, our aspirations, and our past history, they are all the same. So if we have to go forward, if we have to rise to our true potential, let us unite, let us sink our differences, and let us endeavor for peace, which has been evading us so far. I'd like to thank you, Omar Sharifi. I'd like to thank you, Samira, Hamidi.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to both of you. Viewers, keep watching us. Hope to see you in the next program, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.